That's right, folks. Another episode of the Razzball Fantasy Football Podcast. I am your host, Bobby LaMarco, and today we're going to be breaking down the slot versus wide points per game allowed analysis and the top wide receiver matchups for Fantasy Football Championship Week, folks. On today's show, we're going to break down some studs, maybe some duds that could end up winning you your fantasy title. All that and more starting right now on the Razzball Fantasy YouTube channel. And you know what? At this point, I want to congratulate Ben Wasley. He's no longer a guest. He's a host. He's a co-host. The man, my right hand, he's not even a right hand anymore. He's just like the whole thing. I love every second of it. It's Ben Wasley. Go at Fantasy First Down No on Twitter. What's going on, Ben?
Good to be here. It's championship ring. We're fighting for those rings. I'm ready to go. I'm in 4 playoff finals. How are you doing? How many are you in? I know you're in the Fantasy Gridiron one. How many are you fighting for?
4. So I was in 9 leagues, made it to the 16th, week 16 and 8, 1/2, which, feels very unsatisfying. It's still good. Not bad. Honestly, I think in hindsight, like 4 out of 9 leagues is pretty good in general. So I'm okay with it. I lost my big money leagues, which is just like, it kind of takes the winds out of the sails a little bit. What about you? You in how many championships? I mean, I know you're in like 45,000 leagues, but any notable ones?
I've lowered my leagues a lot this year. I'm well under. I used to be in about 30. Now I'm in, I don't know, a bit over a dozen, I think, serious ones where I'm not actually. I'm in a few where I'm rebuilding, but in the ones that I'm actually competing, I'm in the championship in 4. One in my 32-team league. I'm pretty proud of being in the final of the 32-team league. That's cool. Going strong. It does help where you've got both Rams wide receivers going. That really does help in a 32-team league, but. Really looking forward to this weekend. It's going to be really interesting. Going to be writing every single game. We've got a lot of interesting start-sit questions coming, no doubt.
Yeah, I'm in one league where I lost Cortland Sutton, Amari Cooper, Josh Palmer, Tank Dell, and I made it to the final. And now I'm like, Josh Reynolds or Justin Watson? So it's kind of fun, actually, but it's also horrible. It's horrifying. Yeah. It's horrifying.
Exactly. It's like, fingers crossed, this is the week where I fluke it.
Yeah. I'm playing like the Juggernaut team too, so I'm sure it'll be an absolute massacre. But anyway, anybody currently watching across the board, make sure you follow us at Razzball Fantasy on YouTube, IG, and TikTok. And if you're following us on Twitter, watching us on Periscope right now, jump over to YouTube. We're doing great stuff on YouTube as well. Leave a comment, you guys here. We'll be answering questions throughout the show if you have start-sit questions. But as a reminder, as always, we do our Sunday live start-sit show. We will be doing 1 hour from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. PST. That's noon to 1 o'clock East Coast time, and whatever time, I think it's like 3 a.m. Ben's time or something like that.
It is. It literally
is. We will be on for an hour answering all your start-sit questions. So go subscribe, go check us out. And plus, we'll be here all off-season long. We might have a week off at best because we always love talking football. All right, so basically, on today's show, me and Ben have picked 3 guys we wanted to highlight, whether they're studs, streamers, or potential duds for Week 17. But as always, if you're new to the show, or if you're watching this for the first time, whatever the reason is, or if you just know where you're at, we basically use our slot versus wide points per game allowed tool over on Razzball.com. And essentially what we have done is created a tool that actually brings points allowed by defense in the slot, meaning slot receivers, interior guys, and players out wide. Great tool to help you figure out who to start and sit every week. So we just wanted to break down the top 10 on our list before we go into the players we wanted to highlight. First off, the Giants this week, that's Slayton and Hyatt out wide. These are your top 10 out wide matchups. Slayton and Hyatt against the Rams, Pittman and Pierce against the Raiders, Collins and Brown against the Titans, St. Brown and Reynolds. And I know what people are thinking already. St. Brown's a slot guy, but trust me, he gets so many targets. He's basically the out wide guy as well. They're playing against Dallas. My apologies. Should say Dallas, not Detroit. Rice, Watson for Cincinnati, Jerry, Jeudy, and Mims, because there's no Cortland Sutton this week. Hint, hint. Maybe we're talking about him against the Chargers. Olave and Shaheed against Tampa Bay. Lamb and Cooks against Detroit. Wilson and Dortch, because there's no Marquise Brown against Philly. And then Diggs and Davis going up against those New England Patriots. Now, Ben, let's talk to the people. What players did you want to highlight first this week?
Well, for me, number one, got to be Jayden Reed. Jayden Reed looks like he's probably going to be back against the Vikings. The Vikings have been a really good matchup the last couple of weeks, especially against slot guys. The last 6 weeks, they're the third best slot matchup. We saw Amon-Ra and Brown take them 12 receptions for 106 yards and a touchdown. We've even seen slot guys who usually suck, like Tyler Boyd and Hunter Renfrow, still manage to be productive and get 50-odd yards. Jeudy was good against them. The Falcons tight ends, who are essentially their slot receivers, combined for 156 yards and a touchdown against them. You can destroy the Vikings from the slot, and Jayden Reed has been their number one receiver despite being a slot guy. He's yet to top 84 receiving yards this season, which makes him really scary. But he has 100 rushing yards across his last 6 games, and that kind of helps out, kind of balance out that lack of floor that he seems to have. And he's also got 5 touchdowns in that time as well. So he is pretty reliable. He has at least 15 PPR points in 5 of his last 6 games, which is pretty insane. And that's not necessarily going to continue, but in this matchup, he's a pretty strong start. I've got him as a very low-end wide receiver too, but he's the kind of guy that's got upside. It just really depends on his health. It looks like Christian Watson's probably out, so he should be the number one guy, and they might not even have Wicks. So the only thing that scares me, how does Aaron Jones being back affect that? We know that he gets a lot of check downs and work over the middle of the field. What do you think about Jayden Reed this week, Bobby?
He's actually my start of the week. And when I was all excited, I must have blacked out when I read your text because I'm doing all this research on Jayden Reed, and I'm like, I'm super excited that I go back in to look at your bet, and you say Jayden Reed. I'm like, shit. So I had to find another player, but I am all in on Jayden Reed. So here's a couple of the things I wrote up beforehand. The one thing I like about him, number one, he has a nice baseline. He had 4 for 83 the last time these two teams played. You already brought up their slot funnel defense. You brought up that Christian Watson and Wicks are going to be potentially out. Wicks is probably out as well, maybe. But Byron Murphy, the slot cornerback for the Minnesota Vikings, is also out. So not only are they a slot funnel defense, but they're playing without their top slot corner, which is huge. The other thing I absolutely love about Rashee Rice is how the Vikings allow their fantasy points. So for wide receivers, they're 24th in air yards, which means they don't allow a lot of air yards, but they're 3rd in yards after the catch. That's Jayden Reed, 78th in ADOT, 37th in yards after the catch per reception. Beautiful. Hey, it gets even better. Heavy zone team, by the way, the Minnesota Vikings. Jayden Reed, slightly better against zone. All in. I can't even be more excited than I am right now for this. Which brings me to the guy I had to replace him with, which is Rashee Rice. I got nervous. Okay, I got flustered. I had to go with a guy who I felt confident in, because Rashee Rice is essentially now the number one. We kind of insert last week's discussion. And now I know Rashee Rice did not play particularly great. He was fine in PPR, but he really didn't get there overall outside of PPR formats for fantasy football. But I do think he could bounce back against Cincinnati. Now, the matchup on the surface against the Raiders looked amazing. We talked last week, they are yards after the catch. That's what Rashee Rice does. But the Raiders are a different defense now. Since Antonio Pierce took over, that defense is on a different level. They always oddly play well against the Chiefs too, which is just a whole thing. Now, Cincinnati is a little banged up going into this game. They're also dealing with a lot of things going on without Joe Burrow over the Now, the reason why I like Rashee Rice is, one, if you look at the alpha number ones that have faced against the Cincinnati Bengals over the last handful of weeks, there's a lot of guys in there that have done pretty well. So if you just break that down, and I should have had it open, but sorry, I did not do my notes for this player. So I'm just going to just diddly-do. Here we go. Anyway, all right. So just to break this down, of course, we know about George Pickens last week. He went off. It's not really apples to apples. But then you have Jordan Addison and Justin Jefferson. Both played pretty well. Michael Pittman, 8 for 95. So if you start looking at the kind of players that beaten them over the last few weeks, it is the alpha ones. It is the guys like Pittman, for example, who are going to rack up catches and get yards after the catch. That's what Pittman does as well. So that's why I really like Rashee Rice. What's your thoughts about Rice this week? Is he an auto start for you, or do you think he's more of like a wide receiver 3 streamer option?
I'm a little bit nervous because we talked about the type of players that did well, and you did talk about guys like Jefferson and Pittman had really good games, but it has been the wide receiver 2s that have had really good games as well. George Pickens, for me, he's the wide receiver 2 there, and he had a very strong game. Jordan Addison had a huge game. Zay Jones had a really good game, but Calvin Ridley struggled. Deontay Johnson struggled. I'm not really sure that it's definitely the top receiver that's going to be good against the Bengals. It also doesn't really help that Cam Taylor-Britt's coming back for the Bengals. I think he's really going to help them out. So I'm a little bit nervous about Rice. Having said that, in the last 5 weeks, He's the wide receiver 7 league-wide. He's been really good. He's got 3 touchdowns in the last 5 weeks. He's averaging 8 receptions and 70 yards. That makes him really reliable. So I'm not really sure that he's got a massive ceiling, but for me, he's still a top 12 wide receiver. You have to start him. I just wouldn't be thinking, oh, this guy's going to win me this week. I would just be thinking this is a really important building block that I need to have in place to be winning my fantasy week this week. I need to be getting his floor of points. He's going to get me good double-digit PPR points. We don't know how many, but he's someone you definitely have to start.
Jesus, this is what's going on here. Anyway, I was just going to say, if you look at Football Outsiders, Football Outsiders, my apologies. FTN Fantasy, by the way, used some of the guys went over there for Football Outsiders. They break it down by individual wide receivers. So they do defense versus wide receiver 1s, 2s, and they actually show you. And there's a lot of things in the back end. What they do is like, I guess it's based on targets. I couldn't even tell you. I don't work there. But Cincinnati's middle of the pack when it comes to defending one. So you're probably right on this one. It's just one of those things where we kind of see the floor with him. He's just got this volume now with Patrick Mahomes, and the Chiefs have backed themselves into a corner. Like, they need to come out and win. So I can't keep, and they're at home again. I don't see a back-to-back duds in Arrowhead for the Chiefs. But like I said, I didn't have him on my list originally. Ben screwed me over. This is all Ben's fault. Let's move on to Jerry Jeudy.
I'll take the credit. When he's really good this week, I'll take all the credit.
All right, cool.
Okay, let's talk about Jerry Jeudy. So Jerry Jeudy's playing against the Chargers. We know the Chargers are, well, I mean, they're nearly tanking. They're really struggling at the moment. They're getting blown out in games. They're the third best wide receiver matchup season long, particularly out wide. Of recent, they're a very good out wide matchup. They're a quite tricky slot matchup, and that's a bit of an issue for Jerry Jeudy. He's traditionally a slot player, but Cortland Sutton's out, and you'd have to think with Sutton out, he's going to be out wide a lot more. And especially because after the injury to Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy's snaps really jumped up. He's up towards like 75% snaps, which doesn't seem like a lot for a starting receiver, but Jeudy has been playing far lower snaps of late. So it's hard to know exactly what this is going to look like, but you have to feel like he's their wide receiver 1. He's their starter. He's someone you can rely on. Against the Chargers, a lot of players have had big games. Gabe Davis and Devontae Adams both went over 100 yards with touchdowns. We saw touchdowns to Flowers and Dobbs. We've seen some players struggle. Stephon Diggs struggled, but he struggled against everyone recently, so it's hard to know how much of that is the Chargers and how much of that is the Bills. So Jeudy is someone that you can't really rely on, but he's at least an upside play. The problem is last time he played against them was week 14, so that's pretty recently, and he got 2 receptions for 16 yards. And even Sutton, who's their clear wide receiver 1 when he plays, only 3 receptions for 62 yards and a touchdown. So Jeudy is someone that you can play with upside. For me, he's an upside wide receiver 3, but he has a really low floor. So I'd only be starting him if I've got no other option. I just need to shoot for the moon and go for glory, essentially.
Yeah, it just, I mean, Jarrett Stidham's starting now, and it's just like one of those things where I have last season in the 2 starts with the Raiders, Devontae Adams was good for fantasy football. So at least there's that, right? Everybody else, Darren Waller, 5 catches, 107 yards and a touchdown. Great. Stidham just doesn't offer you probably that like 303 upside this week. You're probably more conservative. The good news with Sutton out, I get all that. It's just, we have no idea what Stidham's tendencies are going to be. I just worry that what if he starts throwing to his tight ends a little more? What if he starts checking down a bunch? Like, based on the data last year, he has proven that he could support a wide receiver. Devontae Adams was good. So I don't hate it. It's just, this is the championship, folks. Like, none of us can tell you what Jarrett Stidham, maybe Jerry Jeudy brings breakfast to Jarrett Stidham every day, and he loves him. We don't know. It could be a thing. I don't have a clue. The matchup is solid across the board. The Chargers are 7th in air yards allowed, and that's where Jerry Jeudy gets all his production. He's not even a typical slot guy. He's an air yards guy, and that's what you typically see on the outside, but he's a slot guy who gets air yards, which is, hey, Sean Payton, you do you, buddy. But it's very weird combination. But listen, high upside if you feel like you're an underdog and you need to swing for the fences, I have no problem swinging for the fences with Jerry Jeudy if you need to. But there's a guy I'd rather swing the fences with. It's Noah Brown. Noah Brown, here's the thing. We just did an analysis on quarterbacks' passing production in home versus away. Everybody knows about Dak Prescott. Everybody talks about Dak Prescott. When he's at home, he's a different quarterback. Well, CJ Stroud is neck and neck with Dak Prescott in his home and away passing game splits. So if you want to go check that out, the lineup builder, Derek Favret, he wrote up the article last week. His other article is going to be dropping. It should have dropped today. It'll probably come out later today or early tomorrow. But CJ Stroud at home is dominant, like dominant. And now he gets a Tennessee Titans defense that is third most fantasy points allowed out wide over the last 6 weeks. And with the new shakeup, it's Noah Brown and it's Nico Collins on the outside, and then it's Robert Woods in the slot. So all the lineup metrics don't even make sense anymore. That's how they are now. It's 70% for Nico, 70% for Noah on the outside. So these guys are going to be on the outside against a very banged up Titans defense. Now the Titans always come to play, which is great. But last time they faced 8 for 82 on 11 targets. I know Nico was out, but so was CJ Stroud. So he did that with Case Keenum. So that's always great. The other thing about the Titans are an air yards defense. They're 11th in the NFL in air yards allowed versus 21st in yards after the catch. Brown, since week 11, over the same time frame that we're talking about right now, he's 24th in the NFL in ADOT amongst wide receivers, 84th in yards after the catch. So he's also the air yards guy in this offense. Nico Collins is more the yak guy. On top of this, too, he's better against zone. And great news, the Titans play slightly more zone than the league average. So he's good against zone. It just every box is checked here. And I know CJ Stroud can come out and support 2 guys. So if you really need a boom wide receiver 3, I think Noah Brown would be my pick. What's your thoughts about Brown here, Ben?
Yeah, look, the Titans have become this really good out-wide matchup. We've seen them get destroyed by a couple of teams, and they've been destroyed by the second and third wide receivers as well. We saw the Seahawks combine together for 19 receptions and 206 yards. And it was a big game for Tyler Lockett and a big game for JSN. So we know that there's the potential for that second wide receiver to be big. We saw Jalen Waddle go 6 for 79, second wide receiver having a good game. We saw Jonathan Mingo have a good game as their second wide receiver as well. So the reality is the second wide receiver against the Titans can have a big game, and teams do tend to throw on the Titans a lot. I am very nervous because we haven't really seen a situation where Noah Brown's out wide and he's playing with Collins. When he's played out wide, Collins has mostly been injured. And when they've both played together, he's generally struggled. He's only really had boom games from the slot and when Collins has been out. So it's really hard to tell what impact all of those things coming together are going to have. I feel like there's potential there. He's certainly got upside, but the guy in this game you want to start is Nico Collins. Noah Brown is someone you're just hoping works out. Now, to be fair, a lot of you are going to need someone that you hope works out. We've got a lot of injured players. Amon-Ra Cooper out, Cortland Sutton out, Jalen Waddle out, guys that you would probably be starting if you had them, and you're going to need to replace them with someone. Noah Brown's available in a lot of leagues, so if he's available, he is a good option to pick up. There are a couple of leagues where I picked him up, and I will start him because he has upside, but you've got to understand the floor is very low. He's not a safe option. He's an upside option. So if you want to shoot for the stars, Noah Brown's a good idea. I like him better than Jerry Jeudy for that. He does have more upside, but he's also got a really, really, really low floor.
Let's get into it. Now, not everything's been positive. So far, a lot of starts, a lot of streamers, but you know what? Ben couldn't help himself. He had to take a trip to Negative Town with T. Higgins. Talk to us about T.
Look, what can I say? I like to mix it up. I like to give you a little bit of the hot and cold. That's how we do it here. Look, T. Higgins against the Chiefs. The Chiefs traditionally have been a really hard matchup this season. You know, bottom 10 against wide receivers, one of the toughest out wide matchups. They've been good against the slot, but it seemed to be out wide receivers moving to the slot. I don't really think that's going to work for T. Higgins. We've seen a lot of guys bust against the Chiefs recently. Devontae Adams had 4 total yards last week. We saw Stephon Diggs 4 for 24. Jayden Reed 4 for 16. We've seen A.J. Brown 1 for 8. A lot of dud games against the Chiefs, but most of those dud games happened when the Chiefs lost. Chiefs got an early lead, and then they kind of ran out the game. I'm not sure that that's going to be the case here. The Chiefs really need to be winning this week, and you've got to feel like this could be the kind of game where the Chiefs, even if they don't get an early lead, certainly score plenty of points. We know you can score on the Bengals, so I'm not sure this is going to be a situation where a team can just run out the game and not need to use their wide receivers. The other thing to keep in mind as well, L'Jarius Sneed, who always travels with the number one receiver, he's questionable. He could easily be out this week. The Chiefs have been training as if he's not going to play. So that would free up T. Higgins. Of course, if Jamar Chase plays, then suddenly T. Higgins isn't even the number one wide receiver, and you've got a big problem because we know they'll force the ball to Jamar Chase no matter who's tracking him all game. So Higgins has been really productive with Browning. In fact, since Browning came in and Higgins has been healthy, Higgins is the league-wide wide receiver 10. So there's upside there. The problem is if Chase plays, suddenly Higgins becomes an afterthought. If Snead plays, then he's got one of the best cornerbacks tracking him all game. So you really need Chase and Snead to be out to make Higgins a strong start. Otherwise, it's more of a risky wide receiver 3, given the matchup, given the fact that he might not get the workload that we expect.
Yeah, I don't know how much to really make of this because it says there's been reports that he's been cleared to play. Yeah, still working through his calf injury. He's questionable for the game. Yeah, a lot of mixed reports. Yeah, I think this is one of those you have to track. You have to monitor. Great player. They're playing on Sunday, right?
Yeah, believe so.
Yeah, so if you come to the Sunday show, we'll track that obviously. But if Snead's out, I completely changed my thought process here. Like I'm playing Higgins, and if Chase and Snead are out, then forget it. He's in. Like you got to play him. They don't really have another cornerback on the outside that's going to really like the Chiefs are one of the very few teams that play enough man that have a shadow corner that have actually done this. This is something you don't see a lot anymore because most teams are moving to zone-based defenses. So if Chase is out and Snead's in, I think I'm probably a little worried about Higgins. Same thing if Chase is in and Snead's in too, because like, are they going to shadow Chase? I don't know. I just think that if Snead's out, this is definitely one of those. It's really important to watch the injury report, making sure that Snead is out before doing anything. If he's in and then Chase is ruled out, I don't think that matters. I think you're still going to be probably wide receiver 3 Higgins, not wide receiver 1 Higgins like we got the last 2 weeks. But I agree. Definitely monitor it. Let's jump out to the last one here. It's Brandin Cooks against the Detroit Lions. Now, I just brought up a stat earlier about the slot for the home versus away splits. Now, this is wild, right? So I didn't realize this. I want to congratulate CJ Stroud. Everybody, congratulations. CJ Stroud has officially surpassed Dak Prescott for home away split differential. Congratulations, CJ. But Dak Prescott, 13.6 passing points per game more at home. He averages 28 fantasy points at home this season in the passing game alone. Forget about the legs, forget about rushing, 28 fantasy points. So that's where you're like, okay, right there, we know that the Cowboys are home playing against Detroit. That's one check. The second check, the Detroit Lions are a top 10 defense allowing fantasy points out wide. That's another check. The other check, Detroit is a very good football team, which means that the Cowboys aren't going to be able to win 30-3. You know this is going to be a competitive game, which I like a lot. Another check in this whole thing. The Lions are an air yards defense. They're second in the NFL in air yards allowed this season, 25th in yards after the catch. That's perfectly fine. Brandin Cooks, 30th in ADOT among qualified receivers, 82nd in yards after the catch per reception. So that's how he gets it done. The other thing about Cooks, they use him all over the formation. He's not like a left side, outside guy only. They use CeeDee Lamb as the primary slot guy, but they use Cooks kind of mirroring him a little bit in the slot out wide. He kind of mirrors Olave and KJ Osborne. And KJ Osborne just had a huge game against the Detroit Lions. So that, and of course, Nick Mullins, 400 yards, then he gets benched. What world are we living in, folks? Come on. Oh, anyway. The other thing about the Lions defense, they play a lot of man coverage, which is great because this season, according to PFF, Cooks has been a little better against man. So he checks a lot of boxes for me. Now, this is another one of those streamer wide receiver 3 guys. Like, I am not going to probably be starting him over a stud. But like I said, with all the injuries this week, Brandin Cooks is probably a guy on waivers, maybe a bench guy. You could scoop up, play him as your wide receiver 3. That gives you a major upside, similar to a guy like last week we talked about, Gabe Davis. So just a thought here. Ben, what's your thoughts about Brandin Cooks before we get to your streamers and stashes?
I mean, look, the Lions are traditionally, especially this season, a really good matchup, but they've been a really good matchup for the alpha wide receiver. It's been Jefferson, Sutton, DJ Moore, Olave, Christian Watson, DJ Moore. They've all had massive games. DJ Moore had 2. And it's really only been KJ Osborne who's managed to buck that trend, and that's because Nick Mullins just blew up and threw for over 400 yards. I don't know that that's going to be the case here. It could be. Dak Prescott certainly got that available to him, but there's more other options available in this offense. They could go to Michael Gallup. They could go to Jalen Tolbert. They'll definitely go to Jake Ferguson. They're going to use Tony Pollard. There's a lot more other options here that simply weren't available to the Vikings, for example, when they went to Osborne a lot. So it's harder to see them needing to throw the ball to Cooks. We know they'll definitely go to CeeDee Lamb, but they'll probably also use Pollard a heap, even though it's a terrible running matchup. And they'll use a lot of Jake Ferguson and probably even the other tight ends. I just feel like there's so many mouths to feed that there is a really, really low floor. We've seen the last 3 weeks, Brandin Cooks has had 2 receptions every week for the last 3 weeks. He's averaging 21 yards. I can't trust that. I think the upside isn't really there to make it worth that risk. There's so much more upside with your Noah Browns and your Jerry Jeudy's. Now, I know they're not necessarily available, and Brandin Cooks may be who is available to you, but I just don't see a situation where I want to start Brandin Cooks. I'm just so scared that he's going to have a dud game. There's such a low floor. So with someone with such a low floor, with the ceiling harder to access, I just don't want any part of Brandin Cooks this week, even though it should be a really good matchup. Maybe in DFS, maybe he's an interesting play, but in my fantasy Super Bowl, I'm not going anywhere near it.
Outside of so 4 of the last 5 home games, he's averaged 14 PPR points. So
he scored a touchdown though in 4 of them. That does really help.
I think that's kind of fantasy football sucks in that way, where a lot of this is driven by a touchdown. Like a guy could go 6 catches for 50 yards, and that's better than 3 for 30, but the 3 for 35, 5 in the end zone, and that's the better play. It's like, it is what it is. Cooks, I think this is where I kind of was viewing a lot of this stuff. The matchups top 10, Detroit, the matchup, the upside. Playing in Dallas is key here too. For me, it's more like there's so many injuries now this week. If you had Amari Cooper on Thursday night and you're like, well, now who am I replacing him with? You might be in a huge hole because you're not having your studs. You don't have the Keenan Allens of the world, Jalen Waddles. You brought up so many good names. I'm just kind of thinking to myself, who is a guy who's proven it when they had the chance to in the certain situations? The floor has been there. I mean, the Philadelphia game, he was a bust. But outside of that game, every other home game, he's been good. So I don't know. I just think that at this point, I was just trying to search for good guys who have done it before in good matchups if you need it. Like, these are perfect guys to bring to the Sunday show. Would you start? I don't have a list of a good wide receiver 2 right now. Let's try to find a good start, because you're going to probably pick Jerry Jeudy types over Cooks anyway, but like Adam Thielen versus one of these guys, like Noah Brown, Brandin Cooks, Jerry Jeudy. Are you starting Thielen over all 3 of those guys?
Yeah, to me, Brandin Cooks is at the bottom of that list. I'd probably have him behind guys like Shaheed and things like that. I just feel like there's other guys that have a lot more upside. He's even interesting against guys like Curtis Samuel and people like that, the slot wide receivers who are going to get you a lot of receptions. Demario Douglas is another guy who's probably available, especially in PPR. There's just a better floor there for these guys that they're going to get receptions. Cooks, you just don't know that. You don't know he's going to get receptions. There's a real possibility he gets you 2 or 3 PPR points. I feel like with most of these other guys, there's at least a floor of 6, 7, 8. And generally, I think that's a little bit safer unless you're really shooting for upside.
And we said the same thing last week about Gabe Davis, and Gabe Davis went off. And so, it's one of those things where irony is Diggs sucked, and so did James Cook. And so, no one wanted to start Gabe Davis because they're like, well, you got Diggs, so the argument, you got to play the law of it. You got to play the odds, right? What are the odds of this, and this? Your thought process, it's not worth the floor because the floor can kill you. So maybe if you're a top seed, and let's say you do have the Cortland Suttons and the Jamari Coopers, you don't go for a guy like Brandin Cooks because all I need is 10 points, safe 10 points. But if you're a huge underdog and you feel like if I don't get a boom week, 15 points to 20 in PPR, Cooks can do that for you at home in a game that could be a shootout. Instead of doing Curtis Samuel, who goes 4 for 50, maybe you go to Cooks. But if you're a 1 seed and you're like, I just need to be safe here, I just need 10 points to fill my spot, then yeah, maybe you don't go after Cooks. But we've seen it goes both ways all the time. But Gabe Davis was the prime example last week. Gabe Davis, by the way, no one's floor is lower than Gabe Davis. Gabe Davis is 0 points constantly. So We all saw it last week, and then this week he gets New England. So don't chase the points. New England loves shutting down Gabe Davis. So
yeah, don't
worry
suck
about
at
that.
that.
Yeah, don't do that. Do not do that. All right, Ben, let's get into some questions before we jump
Let's
into
do
your
it.
streamers and stashes here. First off, we got Jamie. Jamie, always a pleasure. Jamie has become an honorary Razzball member. Jamie's probably going to have to just become a contributor.
He's like
at this
the
point.
third host every week.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Congratulations, Jamie. You've been promoted. We appreciate you.
Here's your
got
badge,
Juan.
17 weeks.
Yeah, we got Juan here. Who are my wide receiver 1 and 2 RB2 and flex spots? So he's got Justin Jefferson, Rashee Rice, Jacoby Myers, Lockett, Robinson, CEH, James Conner, Zamir White, Josh Jacobs. So what's the thoughts here? It's Demarcus Robinson taking over here. Now, remember, Justin Jefferson's going to be playing with this rookie. Like, it's no more Nick Mullins. Like, I don't really know what the Vikings are doing. They're playing this rookie. Maybe this kid is something special, but does that worry you about Justin Jefferson here?
Not enough to not start him. I've still got Justin Jefferson. Even with Jaron Hall, I've still got Justin Jefferson as a top 3 wide receiver in that matchup, in that situation. I'm definitely going to be starting Justin Jefferson. We talked about Rashee Rice. I think you've got to start Rice. So Jefferson and Rice for me are totally locked in. I think with your running backs, it's a little bit messy because I feel like Josh Jacobs and Zamir White, if they're both playing, it's really hard to trust either of them. If Josh Jacobs is out, suddenly White becomes really interesting and he's someone you can definitely start. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, it's that same situation. He's not practicing now, but Isaiah Pacheco is. So is Pacheco starting and CEH is out now? Like, we don't know what's going on there yet. We don't have a clear idea, and that's really scary given we've already had the Friday practices. So you would expect to know by this point in the week who you're expecting and who you're not expecting, and we're not getting a lot of insight in either of those backfields, and that makes them both really scary. At this stage for me, I think you probably have to start James Conner. He's been one of the best running backs in the league. I know he doesn't get the results, but if you look at his yards per carry, if you look at what he does on the field, he's been spectacular in a terrible offense. They're going to have to use him. So James Conner for me is someone that in any matchup you can probably start. So I'd lock in Jefferson, I'd lock in Rice, and I'd lock in Conner. And because of how messy it is in those backfields, unless we know other information, I'm probably starting Tyler Lockett. I feel like Lockett's pretty safe this week. He's a wide receiver too, especially if it's PPR. He's a lot safer. I would start him over the guys like Robinson, who's been a little bit lucky.
Robinson is one of those things where I think he had like 2 catches, 30 yards and a touchdown. And listen, the Giants are, the problem is not the defense. Like, their defense has been playing okay. And this is a West Coast team riding high. And the Rams are going to win the game. I'm not saying that. But don't be surprised if the Giants defense shows up a little bit. And listen, you got Kupp, you got Puka. How many times, doesn't it mean like the law of averages is going to kick in here? It's not going to be Demarcus Robinson this week.
It's hard to see it being Robinson unless Puka's out, because there has been some suggestion that Puka might be out. He is questionable. So I think he near definitely plays. But if Puka's out, that makes Robinson interesting. That's the only situation where I'd be thinking about Demarcus Robinson.
Yeah, I think at this question, and Juan, if you know anything about our show, we do our Sunday live show. Like, we'll have more information, who's in, who's out. So please join us again for that. But honestly, it's going to be really tough to sit Justin Jefferson. Like, if you sit Justin Jefferson and he goes off, you're gonna hate yourself forever. You're not gonna be happy about it. But at the same time, like, this kid Hall, like I said, sometimes it's easier to take what you know. Like Rashee Rice, I feel like I know he's gonna be good. James Conner, you brought up, even Zamir White. Like, the Raiders, what they do right now is they run the football. They're facing, and Josh Jacobs might be out. He's been dominant on the ground. He just dominated the Chiefs. And the Colts run defense doesn't scare me. I wouldn't be – honestly, I feel more comfortable with Rice, Conner, and Zamir White. That sounds terrible if Josh Jacobs is out. Sitting Justin Jefferson might be getting too cute. And listen, there's no TJ Hawkinson. If Jordan Addison's ruled out officially, I don't know if he has been yet. But at the same time, there's nowhere else for this kid Hall to go. But, like, what's this kid's deal? Like, I don't know anything. Hall plays – I think he's thrown 10 passes this season. I don't know. I can't give you a good analysis there. I really can't. Like, it's just, if you want the safer plays, it's probably Rice, it's probably Conner, and it's probably White. But Justin Jefferson's Justin Jefferson. So I just don't think you'll be upset with yourself if you play Justin Jefferson. I know it's a terrible answer, but that's how I feel. Scott, bringing it in. Always a pleasure. By the way, Scott, if you see this all green, this is a super chat. Scott has been one of our best followers forever. He's always donated to the show. We appreciate everybody who donates to the show. And by the way, if you don't know, we kick back 10% of every dollar donated to the show to a charity called Good Sports that helps underprivileged communities provide sporting equipment to help kids play sports. So it's going to be that time of year. We're really excited to give our donation at the end of the season. But Scott, we appreciate you as always. Scott comes back here. Ben, I don't know if you met Scott before. Scott, Ben, Scott. PPR League, Ridley, D-Hop, or Nico Collins need one wide receiver and one flex for the chip. What do you got, Ben?
Firstly, congratulations on getting to your Super Bowl. I feel like most people who are listening are probably in their fantasy Super Bowl, so congratulations. Yeah. You're still listening, you're still in the season, or you're still caring about whatever matchups you've got. That's awesome. In this situation here, I think you got to start Nico Collins. When he's healthy, he is so good. We talked about the matchup being good for Noah Brown. It's even better for Nico Collins. So I'm starting Nico Collins. The issue with Calvin Ridley is that Trevor Lawrence is out. Now, we haven't seen Trevor Lawrence be out at all since he came into the league. So it's really hard to know exactly what that's going to look like for Ridley, but it's probably not going to be good. CJ Beathard isn't hopeless, but I certainly don't want to be relying on him to get Calvin Ridley the ball. This feels like more of a check down Evan Ingram style game. So even though D-Hop hasn't had a fantastic matchup, he probably has a far bigger ceiling than Ridley. I'd go with Collins and D-Hop unless you're in a situation where you just really need the floor out of these guys. I feel like Ridley probably has a slightly higher floor than D-Hop. We've seen D-Hop get in situations where the Titans just run all game. I think that's possible here. I think with Ridley, you're likely to at least get 3 or 4 receptions, which gives you that better floor. But the upside of D-Hop is so much higher than Ridley without Lawrence that I'd personally start Collins and D-Hop.
The Panthers defense this whole entire year has been extremely good in the secondary. They've been dealing a bunch of injuries. They've been able to shut down guys constantly. I don't really have a reason why, but here's Nico Collins a lock for me. We talked about Noah Brown today because I was trying to be creative. Like, hey, here's a guy you can start at wide receiver. Nico Collins is the guy. You're starting Nico. Nico's locked in for me. He is like, forget about start of the week. I thought he's an auto start. He's an auto start in my opinion. On the other flip side, here's the tiebreaker between the two. I think CJ Beathard will be fine. You watched the game, Lawrence got hurt the last time. Bucket it at least. He was giving Calvin Ridley some shots downfield, which is nice. Were they good? That's not really up for we don't know. But here's the tiebreaker for me for Hopkins and Ridley. If you look at the matchup, number one, the matchup favors Hopkins in general. The Houston Texans have allowed a little more fantasy points out wide. But here's the difference. Both these guys are big-time ADOT guys. They're not huge after the catch. They get the ball downfield. That's how they get their fantasy points. The Houston Texans, by the way, did you watch Amari Cooper last week? That was against the Houston Texans, okay? The Houston Texans have all the 4th most air yards this season. Meanwhile, the Carolina Panthers are 28th in that metric. Just go with the numbers on that. I'm going to go with Ben. I'm going to go Nico Collins, and I am going to go D-Hop. I like that. All right. Jumping down to the next one here, we have Juan. We have Carr, Murray, and Browning. There's a QB question. Carr has Tampa Bay. Kyler Murray has the Philadelphia Eagles. And then Browning, I believe, Cincinnati has Kansas City. What's your thoughts here, Ben?
I really like Derek Carr this week. When we talk about my streamers, he is my QB streamer of the week. I feel very good about him this week against Tampa. That's a fantastic matchup. But I do have Kyler Murray higher. The problem with Kyler is that he hasn't really been practicing properly. He's had an illness. But players generally nearly always play through illnesses. So I expect him to play. I expect him to be fine. For that reason, I would start Kyler against Philadelphia. We know teams need to score a lot against Philadelphia through the air. They've got a good run defense. And given that San Francisco really only have running backs as their main weapons, they're going to have to use Kyler somehow. I suspect we're going to see a lot of Kyler's legs. I suspect we're going to see a lot of checkdowns. I think we're going to see a lot of Trey McBride. For that reason, I'm going to go with Kyler Murray, even though Derek Carr's really close. And the fact that Marquise Brown is out makes me a little bit nervous. I wouldn't even consider Jake Browning in this situation.
I think it's Kyler. It's easy. I like Kyler because, first of all, last week we kind of showed his against Chicago on the road in Chicago against a much improved Chicago defense without Marquise Brown. He put up decent amount of points for fantasy football in the passing game. Philadelphia, for whatever reason, just hasn't gotten it together. Like Tyrod Taylor's out there making it rain against Philly. I think Kyler Murray's he's going to be a souped-up version of that. And honestly, Kyler offers you a high floor because of the rushing. But then if he can unlock any type of ceiling, like we've seen this, his type of game where he got blown out against San Francisco, right? The game's not going to look pretty. They might lose by 20, but Kyler's going to rack up stats in those type of games, check downs, scrambles. That's why I want Kyler Murray, and I would definitely start him in this scenario as well. Even though Derek Carr or Matthew Stafford, Ben, just asking for a friend.
Oh, look, I would go Matthew Stafford. I feel like he's into that like every week start now. For me, Derek Carr is my favorite streamer, but I think Stafford, I don't even consider him a streamer anymore. I think you just have to start him every week.
God, that's what I have it in. Let's hope we're right. All right, Jags, Rams, Colts, D. What do you got, Ben?
I've got them all back to back. I've got Colts 11, Jags 12, Rams 13. Don't love any of them. The Colts have been really good this season. They're the DST 7, depending on your scoring, and the Fantasy Pro scoring, they're 7th. But they do cop a slightly tougher matchup. Las Vegas hasn't been giving away as many points as you would expect for a team that's got Aiden O'Connell at quarterback. However, I still think the Colts are the better bet. Jacksonville just cannot get anything going on defense, even though they're facing Carolina. We saw Carolina looks a little bit better this week. And Jacksonville, they haven't had more than 3 sacks in a game. Pretty much. In fact, they haven't had more than 4 sacks in a game all season. They've mostly been getting 1 or 2 sacks most weeks. They've been conceding a lot of points, over 30 points 3 of the last 4 weeks, and they haven't even had the toughest matchups. They're just impossible to trust. And I don't really want to go anywhere with the Rams. I agree with what you said. I think the Giants are just probably going to get their defense going this week. The Rams are 29th DST this season. I don't want to trust them at all. I'm going to go with Colts despite the matchup.
I will say this. If the Seattle Seahawks are available, I kind of like them at home versus Pittsburgh over these guys this week. The Jags have the Carolina Panthers. And by the way, you know, people who started up until week 16, if you started your defense against the Panthers, it was a great decision, except for the Packers, who have just become, I don't even know what happened to the Packers defense. They got me 1 point. It was great. But anyway, every other team up to this point has done well against that team. The other thing with the Raiders, they don't have a passing game right now. They want to beat you on the ground. And unfortunately, the Colts kind of have been beatable on the ground, which always worries me. The one thing I'll say about the Jags run defense is much better than their passing defense, which is kind of good for them because that's what the Panthers want to do. So truthfully, I'm actually going to go Seattle if you can get them. Then I'm going to go Jags. I'm just going to assume the Packers are a train wreck right now on defense and then ride that Carolina Panther wave. All right, let's go to Vito. How you doing, Vito? Always a pleasure. Glad to have you on. If Chase sits, should I start in full PPR, Godwin, London, or Shaheed? Or should I hold and pick up Pickens or Jeudy as a fill-in? Here's a good question, Ben. You picking up Jeudy or you starting one of those guys this week?
Chris Godwin. Chris Godwin has been very involved the last, 3 or 4 weeks. All of a sudden, he's turning into what we expected him to be. For me, he's a locked-in wide receiver too. All those other guys are like speculative wide receiver 3-4 types. We've seen Godwin have some really big games. He's got 21. In fact, he's got over 10 targets each of the last 3 weeks. He's gone for a total of like 280 yards in the last 3 weeks combined. He just hasn't gotten a touchdown. He's not getting touchdowns, but he's getting the opportunities. And I feel like that's talking about a really safe floor, especially in PPR. Got to be Godwin. Not even close. No conversation. You're going to give me conversation, aren't you?
I wanted to give you conversation. I just, the Saints defense, for what it's worth, even without Marshawn Lattimore, have figured out a way to be still okay. Now, I want to actually, before I say anything, I want to make sure I'm accurate on this because they did last week face against, that's the Puka game. They got dominated by Puka. They got dominated by Demarcus Robinson. Okay. Yeah. I'll go with Chris Godwin. I think Chris Godwin's the safer play. But I think if I wanted a little boost, I'll say this. If you need a boost in your lineup, Rashid Shaheed has much more juice in his matchup against Tampa, who'll be out Charlton Davis this week, one of their top outside cornerbacks, and he'll have been just getting crushed vertically all year long. They're one of the highest air yards defenses allowed this season, and that's where Shaheed breads his butter. So I think if you need a high upside play, I'm going to go Shaheed here. But if you need that safe, like Ben brought up, double-digit targets at 3 straight weeks. Even against Atlanta, he had 5 for 50. That's double digits in PPR. I would go Chris Godwin there as well.
Breads his butter. Love it.
There we go. All right, Jamie, I will try to catch you all your shows. You guys rock. Thanks, Jamie. We appreciate you, buddy. All great. All well there. All right. Oh, we got another one. Slayton. By the way, appreciate it, sir. Obviously, thank you for the donation. We appreciate the hell out of that. We got pick 2 PPR, a chain, Bijan, Zamir, and then the Rams and Buffalo defenses. What do you got here, Ben?
I think you got to start Bijan. I know he's had some up and down weeks. He's been a little bit hard to trust, but this week for me, he's a top 10 option. I feel like he is for most people. I think against Chicago, you've got to assume that they're going to use quite a bit of Bijan. So I would start him. The real question with Zamir is what's happening with Josh Jacobs. If Josh Jacobs plays, Zamir White's really hard to trust. Having said that, it wouldn't shock me if they just shut Jacobs down for the season. If Jacobs is out, I would definitely start Zamir White. He's been so good in every single matchup. I know this isn't the world's greatest situation, but Jacobs is doubtful, I think, at this time. So you've got to assume that Zamir White's going to play. And if that's the case, you're definitely starting him against the Colts. I just can't trust Achane. It becomes really interesting in this situation if Raheem Mostert's out. I know we expect Mostert to play, but if he's out, then Achane becomes a little bit more interesting. If Mostert's in, though, I feel like you can't possibly start Achane. You can't trust him. There's so much going on. He nearly ended up with Jeff Wilson getting the same amount of carries as him last week when Mostert wasn't playing. So it's really a difficult situation. Bijan, yes. Zamir, near definitely yes. As for Rams and Buffalo, we talked about the Rams just before. I much prefer Buffalo in general. They have struggled with injuries a little bit, but they've still managed to make it work, and they have New England, which is a fantastic matchup. So Bijan, Zamir, Buffalo.
A lot to unpack. So the one thing I will say about Bijan that's important here is the Bears are terrible at pass-catching running backs. They cannot cover running backs out of the backfield. That's where Bijan's still getting. And listen, Taylor Heineke, for what it's worth, has infuse some level of competency in the passing game, which I like. And last week we saw it with Bijan getting a lot of receptions in the game. So I do like Bijan a lot this week. I wrote him up in my running backs article this week. So I like that. If Mostert's out for whatever reason, you're going to go to a chain here. But I think the biggest problem for me is they're playing Baltimore on the road. And honestly, I don't love that, especially with no Waddle too. I just think that maybe Miami, this might be, everyone's kind of worried about Tua. If you're worried about Tua and that offense as a whole, you don't really want to play them against Baltimore, who just embarrassed the freaking 49ers on the road, which means they'll probably not play well. And the Dolphins are rushing
half their secondary.
Yards.
Half of their secondary is injured at the moment, which is going to be interesting. All of a sudden, 5 members of their secondary are suddenly questionable or out. So that is the only interesting point, but that doesn't help Achane at all. That makes it worse for him. That means they're probably more likely to throw over the top to Hill. So that'll still help him regardless. It does make Cedric Wilson an interesting streamer, by the way, if you're really desperate.
Yeah, a good call there. I think that for me, it's Bijan and Zamir. It looks like Jacob is labeled doubtful. So I think you're riding the hot hand with Zamir. And like I just brought up, the Colts run defense is not intimidating at all. You could definitely run on them. And that's what they want to do. They want to run the football consistently. So I like that. And then Buffalo for me. New England, honestly, Bailey Zappe's playing better, I guess, and they did show a little bit against that Broncos defense last week, who's been okay for most of the season. But I actually think you got to keep rolling with Buffalo. What they did a few weeks ago, playing against, I believe it was the Dallas Cowboys. Yeah, that game really showed me that they're legit. And I think that I'm going to ride with Buffalo, and I'm going with Ben, Zamir, and Bijan as well. All right, let's try to get through some more of these before we get out of here. Juan Penales. I like this. We're getting a lot of flavor around here. I love this. This is good for us, man. Appreciate you guys for jumping on. We do appreciate you asking to start sits. But as a reminder, we have our start sit show every Sunday, 9 to 10. We're doing 1 hour show. Make sure you jump on Sunday live, 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. PST. And we'll be on there for an hour answering start sit. And we'll have more information on injuries as well. Achane, Barkley, Rice, pick one, Ben. PPR, Ravens defense or Raiders defense?
I appreciate we've got a second one of the game of the podcast already. Usually we don't even have one, and today we've already got 2, so it's going well. We already talked about Achane. Achane's been unless Mostert's out, and even if Mostert's out, he's still, especially compared to Barkley and Rice. They're both wide receiver 1, running back 1 options for me. Barkley against the Rams, it's a little bit hard to trust. You would expect a lot of checkdowns, which really helps in PPR, but I feel like Rice has just got that safe floor. We talked about him earlier today. That floor is really safe. Congratulations on being in an excellent situation where you're choosing whether to sit Barkley or Rice. That's a really good situation to be in. I'd probably sit Barkley. I just don't really trust that whole situation. It's just a little bit scary knowing that he may just be totally schemed out of the game if they go down early. They probably won't, but it is always possible with the Giants that their whole offense just really struggles and falls in a heap. So that's less likely to happen with Rice. Rice has way more upside. We know they're going to use him. He is their number one option now that Kelsey's getting double teamed constantly. So I feel like you've got to go that way. As for the DSTs, I actually prefer Baltimore. I know that Miami's a little bit scary, but they're missing Waddle. They may be missing Mostert. I feel like there's enough there that, assuming that the Ravens aren't totally decimated in the secondary, that the Ravens should at least be able to stop them. They stop pretty much every other team. I feel like it's a start your stud situation. Start the Ravens. I know that the Raiders have been really good the last couple of weeks, but it's been on touchdowns. They've had 2 touchdowns the last 2 weeks on defense. That's not likely to keep happening. That's a little bit fluky. Touchdowns with DSTs is really fluky. So I feel like we can't rely on that happening again. So I'd go with the Ravens.
Yeah. This is tough because Tyrod he's infused something into the offense a little bit. And for whatever reason, the Giants have just decided to give Barkley 30 freaking touches, even though they've been eliminated from the playoffs, because I guess they're not going to re-sign him because they're like, hey, we're just going to give this guy so many carries. It makes no sense. But so when you're looking at that, it's like, it's hard. This was the Breece Hall discussion we had on the Tuesday show. I was like, yeah, I'm a little concerned, but the guy got 32 touches last week, and he's going to get there. It only takes 1 at that point, and he just did it against the Eagles. Now, I know Kamara just struggled, but I'm just going to stick with Barkley. I think, in my opinion, he's just getting so many touches that – and if you look at the last few weeks, the Rams, because they have been playing so well, Kamara 5 catches, Gibson 5 catches, Jerome Ford 3 for 33 and 1. Then you have 4 catches for Michael Carter and James Conner in that game. There's 6 catches for Zach Cabernet. Like, in PPR formats, that just offers you a crazy floor. And Barkley is a complete workhorse. So at that point, it's like, if he's going to get you 6 catches, that floor is that's matching what Rice might get, maybe 6 to 8. And then you get all the carries. So I think we're going to go Barkley there, just slightly, even though I love Rice too.
Barkley, the last 3 weeks, has had 3 games where he hasn't gotten over 7 PPR points. He got 7 PPR points against Dallas, he got 6 against New England, and he got 6 against New Orleans. And they're all tough matchups, but I don't think that floor is very good. I feel like, given how often he's struggling, he's had some good games. He was good against the Packers. He was good against Washington. So is everybody. And he did look good against Philly, but I feel like that was more of a fluke. It's one of his last 4 tough matchups. He's been good. The others he really busted. I don't think I can trust that.
Sure, but it's up and down, right? 36, 25-5, 17. Like, it's up and down. I get that. And listen, it's not safe, but Tyrod Taylor offers competency at quarterback. Tommy DeVito, I listen, it was fun, but that New Orleans game was an idea of like how not consistent he's been. And listen, this is another great scenario where, like, Rice hasn't had that many big time boom games. He doesn't have a lot of 25-point games. Barkley's done that like 4 times. He's been in 20-point games. So, like, I get it. Maybe the floor might be a little lower for Barkley because of the matchup, but he had 29 opportunities last week. I just think the Rams, I get it. The Rams have been good, and they shut down Alvin Kamara. But Alvin Kamara had 9 carries. Like, Barkley's he's been under 10 carries once all season. That was against New Orleans on the road. So, and they got railroaded in that game. So I think Tyrod offers me a little more security. I think he's going to get you that, 6 targets last week with Tyrod against Philly. Listen, I just think that there's too much upside to pass up. I like Rice too. I think if you want a safer bet for 15 PPR points, it's probably Rice. But if I want upside and I want to take a shot at the championship, I'm going to go Barkley. As for the defense question, doesn't it just feel like the Raiders defense is red hot? And now they're playing Gardner Minshew and company. Are they playing in New Orleans? Are they playing in Las Vegas? Though they're on the road. I think I'm going to, the Ravens at home against Miami or the Raiders on the road against the Colts. That's a tough one. It's hard to pass on the Ravens after what they just did to the 49ers. I'm not going to get cute. I'll play the Ravens. I'm not trying to get cute in that one. All right, let's keep going here. We do have a couple more. We got Jamie. It's okay to be broke. I'm broke too. All good, brother. We appreciate it. All right, start 2 full PPR, Addison, Bateman, CEH, Roschon. We get 0.1 per rush attempt and 0.5 rushing and receiving first down. So that's talk about team. It just should be point. We love points. This is like so many points. All right, we got Addison, Bateman, CEH, Roschon, start 2.
I love these sort of leagues where you get some really interesting scoring settings where you really need to think it through and work out what's going on. It's hard not having looked at the data on these sort of things, how wide receivers and running backs would compare. But 0.1 per rush attempt is really only going to get you another 2 points. So I can't imagine that making a massive difference. And the first downs generally actually go to receivers, not running backs. So I'm definitely starting Addison, assuming he's healthy. I'd start Addison. Where it gets really interesting is the running backs. I don't know whether Pacheco's playing. If Pacheco's playing, then you can't start CEH. He's way too scary. I don't think you can start Bateman, even if Odell Beckham's out. But I don't love Roschon either. Roschon's really scary this week. They probably got Donta Foreman back. We saw that Khalil Herbert was the clear early down running back. They basically cycled their starting back the last 3 weeks. Each of the last 3 games, they've had a different player get the workload. So it's impossible to know what they're going to expect there. The one constant, though, has been that Roschon has been their passing down back. And that gives them at least a bit of a floor. So if you're in a situation where Pacheco plays, then I'd probably start Addison and Roschon simply because I don't trust CEH with Pacheco playing. It's possible they just give him the whole workload.
Yeah, this is like... I don't have a good answer here because like Addison, like Jamal, like this Hall kid, like I have no, I guess I have to like look into him more because like I don't have a clue. Are we gonna think is this kid gonna support Justin Jefferson and Addison? I mean, it's great that Hawkinson's out at least, so you know that there's gonna be targets, but Addison's dealing with an injury, so he's gonna be limited even if he plays. Bateman is splitting the third receiver role with Nelson Aguilar, so he's not getting all the routes. Like, so you're going to have to hope that either because Flowers is also questionable, and Flowers is questionable right now. Beckham, I don't see on the injury report. Oh, he's there. No injury designation, so he's good. So it's going to be Flowers with the calf injury, limited practice on Friday. If Flowers is out, I would definitely play Bateman then. Like, I'd rather take the upside there. But if Flowers is in, I don't even think I want to start either of them. I would just, like you said, then you got Roschon dealing with 2 other running backs. By the way, with the last time all 3 of them played, they each got like 6 or 7 carries, and they split it evenly. In Chicago, this week is playing against Atlanta. Let me see Atlanta's matchup. Let's see Chicago. Sorry, like these are just this is a wide receiver show, so I have to pull up all these other stuff I have. Yeah, like the Atlanta matchup's not that good. Like, it's not a great matchup for running backs. I would take CEH if Pacheco's out, but then you got Pacheco. Is he in or out? Jamie, I don't know. I think you just did this to be kind of a dick. I'm not gonna lie to you. you're like Jamie's like, I'm gonna fuck with these guys. No one really knows yet. There's not enough information. Jamie, I think you're gonna have to come back. I was just joking. Of course, you're not a dick. But if you come back on Sunday, because like we're gonna need more answers. We're gonna need to know who's in, who's out. Are any of these guys playing on Saturday? That's the question. Lions, Cowboys, Lions and Cowboys are the only game tomorrow. So no, Jamie, I'm giving you a homework assignment. I want you to come back on Sunday because we need to talk through it. He'll die on the Roschon Mountain. Maybe you just start your guy then. I think that's the way to go. All right, that's all we got for the questions, I believe. So we're good there. Ben, let's finish up the show with some streamers and stashes and get out of here.
Yeah. One thing I want to mention, by the way, about Duran Hall, if you're playing in a super flex league, he is interesting because he's a rushing quarterback. He does get a lot of running yards. He averaged like 30 rushing yards a game in college, which is pretty solid for BYU. He's also a solid quarterback. He's basically average quarterback, like 8.5 yards per attempt kind of situation. So you're going to get okay plays, not Nick Mullins, but you are going to get service to guys like Jefferson and Addison, and you're also going to get some rushing yardage. So that makes him an interesting, quarterback 2 style play if you're running out of options. I have had people ask me about him. So he's an interesting option in your super flex leagues. Speaking of other streamers, I mean, there's a lot going on. And my favorite streamer that I mentioned earlier in the week, Jerome Ford, who obviously already went off, he was fantastic. I had him and Kareem Hunt as my running back streamers. Obviously, they've already played. If you watched the game, you'd know that they got you a long way to winning you your ring. but you're going to have to read the article to see who else I've got going on there. As for QBs, really like Brock Purdy. He's been dropped in a surprising amount of leagues. If Brock Purdy's available in your league, you have to start him. He's a fantastic starting option over pretty much anyone else available. And I already talked about Derek Carr. Love Derek Carr this week. Wide receiver streamers. We talked about DeMarcus Robinson. He's very risky. I like the upside. Also, Noah Brown, Rashee Shaheed, we already talked about. And my tight end streamer of the week is Gerald Everett. With Keenan Allen out, with Josh Palmer out, who are they going to throw the ball to? It's got to be Gerald Everett. There's even more streamers available. Go read the article on Razzball. Good luck in your fantasy bowls this week.
Yeah, honestly, yeah. And I will say this about Jaren Hall to go back to that. Like, clearly Kevin O'Connell is like, I think he's a good offensive mind. He's been a good coach. This kid must be showing something for them to say, we're not going to deal with the Nick Mullins or Josh Dobbs, who both have won games in the NFL this year and have looked okay. So if you need to hang your hat on something, I guess it's the fact that Kevin O'Connell is willing, because the Vikings are still in it, barely, but they're still in it. So they clearly think that to make a playoff push, they're okay with this kid. So that is saying something, or they just want to see what they have in this kid because they probably know they're not going anywhere. I don't know. Your decision. You go with what you think is the best narrative you want. All right, that's all we got today, folks. We appreciate you jumping on the show. 1 hour, by the way. How did that escalate so fast, Ben? Look at us.
Out of hands.
It did get out of hand. I don't even know where I am right now. That's it. Make sure you subscribe to the Razzball Fantasy YouTube channel. And make sure you jump over to the Razzball.com to see all the great articles we got as well. And join us this Sunday for our last and final Start Sit show. We'll be breaking down all your Start Sit questions, weather updates, injury updates, everything you need to know up until kickoff. So thank you for joining us once again, folks. We are out of here.
Peace.